Well, welcome. Our speaker at the moment is somewhere in transit from one room to another. It's taken her a while, which suggests she lives in a very big house. Oh, there we are. There she is. Welcome, Sam. You had us worried for a moment. We thought you perhaps lived in a castle or something. Well, yes, we've got 31, which is a good attendance for tonight. So you've obviously heard of our speaker. So a double welcome. As I said a moment or two ago, just one or two notices I'd want to just run through with you. First thing I want to mention is called the Benbridge Competition. This is a competition for young people who do a piece of art or text or whatever, which has involved some research into a part of Lancaster. And at our committee meeting last week, we saw an excellent YouTube video done by a 9-year-old about the Ashton Memorial, incorporating Williamson's graves, etc. So it obviously taken her quite a bit of effort. Now, we've been running this for a few years, and the response from schools has been rather disappointing. So this year we've tried a new tack, and so we're opening it out to local brownie groups. And today we made contact with the Cubs and opened the invitation to them also. And we're hoping that there's at least one primary school in Lancaster that's going to join in. So we're optimistically looking for a good number of entries this year. Bailrig Garden Village has been occupying our minds recently. The Civic Society and Lancaster Vision started out very much supporting this development, but we are rather concerned at the way, like Topsy, it's grown and is now 50% bigger than the original site, stretching all the way down as far as the Stork at Conber Green. So we're now getting rather skeptical about the concept, and we've raised some issues with the consultants and with the local authority. So we'll keep you posted on the responses we get from that. Green Plaques. We were invited by the museum service to look at the lack of plaques commemorating women of Lancaster who have made contributions to the city and the people of Lancaster. And we ran a publicity campaign on the websites of the Civic Society and the museum service. We've identified 20 odd women. So far we've picked 3, but that's to enable us to do more research on some of the others. Sister Cox, for example, is one who's been put forward, the one who, thanks to her efforts, we have the hospice, and the hospice are very keen for a plaque. There's a lady who lived up Wyresdale Road, and she founded the RSPB. And the RSPB are interested in doing a plaque with us. And so that's another one. And the other one is a lady who played football for Lancaster ladies football team and went on to play for Dick Kerrs down in Preston. She was a well-known goal scorer, and obviously made quite an impact on the game. In fact, I've put her name forward to PNE. She may still be able to solve our striker problems. And so that's three we're starting off with, and I'm waiting for Roger to come back to me with the name of the company that make the plaques. There's a nudge, Roger. The Canal Quarter is a large piece of important part of the city, which has lain derelict for too many years. The City Council have put some proposals forward, and they have consulted with the Civic Society on those proposals. We are generally in favour, although we are saying that we think they're missing an opportunity for providing some social housing. Again, they've gone back to consult among themselves about that. We've been involved with the consultation on the traffic issues of Lancaster. You've presumably, if you're residents of Lancaster, seen the leaflet which was put through most people's letterboxes, if not all, showing the three options for the city centre and the alterations to junction 33. Now, our feeling in the Civic Society is that whatever you do to the city centre, two-way traffic, pedestrianised areas, whatever, is a total waste of time if you don't do something about the traffic which goes to and from the Loon Industrial Estates. So we are consulting with our members on their opinions, and the responses coming back so far range from a new bridge at the end of the quay to actually moving the Loon Industrial Estate. Again, if you've not had an email advising you of the survey that we've put together, it should be on its way to you in the next couple of days. Have you got a comment?
It's not actually going out public for a few days yet, John, because it's just confined within the members of society initially, just to get a feel, and then we're making it public with press releases and to councillors and council execs, etc.
Yeah. So if you're a Civic Society member, watch this space. If you're not and would be interested in taking part, then if you make contact with us, we'll happily include you in that survey. Would that be right, David? Yep, I've got a thumb there. Right. We agreed some months ago that we would partake in a survey, a national survey with for towns and cities that have a cathedral and historic parts of the area. And the survey for that has arrived this week. It is a far bigger task than we ever expected it to be. It's many pages long and it goes into all sorts of questions. And so we've sent an email round the exec to start with, asking members of our committee if they'd be willing to help put this survey together. The more we get, obviously, the more we can share it out and make the task easier. If you're not on the exec, but would be interested in taking part in that survey, then again, please email David and he'll be happy to include you. So I think that concludes the notices. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Now, she's brought a gang of supporters with her to make sure she wasn't speaking to an empty room, but I think we've proved that we've given you good support tonight. Now, I got a description of Sam, her CV, if you like, and she likes using very long words. Words like pseudo-historical, iconography, and I'm hoping she's going to explain what these mean. The subject of her talk is St. George, and this is as close to St. George's Day as we could get. Sam is a cultural historian of the late medieval period, with a particular interest in the cults of pseudo-historical saints, especially saints who encounter dragons. I would have thought that's a very tiny subject, but anyway, I don't know many saints who have found dragons in their lives, but anyway, I'm about to be educated. She belongs to the history department at Lancaster University, having also been at, I've lost the list, Aberdeen, St Andrews and Huddersfield. So she's finally found civilization. So welcome, Sam. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Absolutely lovely to be here. And it was interesting, actually, when you said earlier on, John, about that people were here because they'd heard me. And I thought maybe it's those who haven't heard me. Those who haven't heard me are staying away in droves, quite possibly. So, but I do recognise some of the names here. And so I know that some of you will have heard me speak before. Hopefully I will say some things that you may not have heard me say before, though, which will provoke, I hope, some discussion at the end. What I'm going to do is to share my screen with you, and we'll keep everything crossed that it will come up okay. David and I did practice this the other day, and we did get there. So bear with me a moment. And I do that, and then I do that, and
Looking good, Sam.
yeah, I need to go into there. Is that coming through?
That's it, got you. Brilliant.
Perfect. From beginning, is that going to work? Yes. Hurrah, excellent. So yes, I'm specifically working the Regional Heritage Centre, which some of you will be very familiar with, our outreach work. And I think I last spoke about St George for Archaeology Forum, probably as I started work at the centre when it was the Centre for Northwest Regional Studies. And so we're going back 12 years now. The problem is, I'm afraid, that we don't have a great deal of medieval material that relates to St George from the northwest of England. So I hope you're going to forgive me, but we're going to start in Yorkshire. If I can get it to move on, that would be even better. Doesn't seem to want to go, so I'll do it like that, and then we'll bring it up. So I've promised you evidence from medieval England. All bar one of the things that I'm going to show you are properly medieval, and all bar one of them are from England. So that's good. I do apologise for the lack of Lancashire material. If anybody wants to send me things subsequently or to tell me what I've missed, that would be marvellous. But yeah, if you can just indulge me a moment, and we'll be on the other side of the Pennines. We have here a 15th century image of St George. Hopefully you can recognise him. with the dragon. I'll talk you through what else is going on in the image presently. But our starting point is that St. George is very well known in the late medieval period. However, he probably isn't recognised as the patron saint of England. His feast day, 23rd of April, I'm sure you all knew that. His feast day would certainly have been observed, but he is very much a saint of the monarchy. He is a saint of the social elites. So, for instance, in 15th century Leicester, there was what amounted to a bylaw, which said that you had to turn up for various reasons in public to witness things such as when the king arrived, things like that. And on the list is the riding of St. George. So on St. George's Day, the social elite, you can tell they're elite because they've got horses, they will parade through the streets and reenact the battle between St. George and the dragon and have a big feast. That is pretty much how a riding of St. George happens. We've got very good evidence from Norwich, but ridings happens in lots of places. Even in Dublin, there is a record of the riding of St. George happening. So I want you to bear this in mind, that St. George is known. However, the way that he is understood may not necessarily be completely familiar to our modern 21st century audience, unless you've read my book, obviously, in which case it will all be very familiar to you. Let's go back to basics, though. We have St. George here, not looking very English, I would say. We associate him, of course, with the Red Cross on a white field, and I'm well aware somebody may want to ask me about it later on. But essentially, no, we don't know why St. George has that symbol. No, it is not peculiar to him. Other saints have it as well, and most obviously Christ has the banner of the resurrection as he steps out of the tomb. That is the banner that he's holding, is the Red Cross on a white field. And also, St. George has other devices, as we would term from a heraldic point of view, associated with him. So here you might immediately assume that the reason that he's wearing red is because it's an allusion to the Red Cross on the white field. But actually, I would say no, it isn't. It is simply that it is a colour scheme that appeals. So don't be surprised if you find him in situations that have absolutely nothing to do with England or Englishness. St. George operates in all kinds of different areas, geographically, chronologically, in terms of subject matter as well. But we can be confident it's him because it's in a book of ours and it is related to an invocation of St. George. So we are confident this is him. But also, those of us who are experienced with his iconography, by which essentially it's a fancy word for symbolism, we can be confident that it's St. George because of not only what he's doing, as in attacking a dragon, but also the context in which he's doing it. So we have behind him the princess with her lamb. I realise it looks extremely implausible. It's floating in the air like a fairground balloon. Our artist of this work, the Bolton Hours, I'm afraid, was not at the top of their game. In a number of the images that they produced in this work, there are ones that are worse than this. I'm just going to put that on record. But nevertheless, we can see here the princess with her lamb. We can see her parents looking out from the tower, watching what is going on. And I do particularly like the expression of the left-hand person, who is almost certainly the queen, looking suitably amazed by what is happening. So the story here is that a naughty dragon has been menacing the people of a city. It's usually understood to be in Egypt. It doesn't have to be. It can be in all sorts of different places, depending which particular version of the legend you're reading. And everybody is trying to keep the dragon away by giving it sheep. The supply of sheep begins to run low, And so the decision is made that a sheep and a person, a young person, is going to be the offering, and they draw lots to decide who's going to be the victim. And inevitably, one day the lot is cast that it is identifying the princess, the king and the queen's only daughter. She is arrayed as for her wedding. That's the kind of description that we get. So essentially, she wears her best clothes. White wedding dresses are a Victorian phenomenon. Medieval period, you just wear the best thing you have to go and get married. So out she goes with the lamb, of course. This is because that's the other part of the offering to the dragon. Interestingly, why are they going out of the town? It is because the dragon is breathing pestilential breath and making people ill. It's not that it's coming into the town or the city and stealing sheep or people or whatever. There is very much this idea of the city as being kept safe from the dragon, which is in the wilderness, and the walls, the tower. That's a very, very strong idea that you get in these images of George and the dragon. And so you keep the dragon away by taking the offering to it. And along comes St. George the Knight Errant. He essentially asks, what can he do to help? He's told to save himself. And he says, no, I will help you. He dispatches the dragon, sometimes subdues it first, and the princess takes it back on a lead. It is beautifully described in one 15th century English version as if it were a meek beast and debonair. So essentially, he brings the dragon under control. Then there is usually a bit of discussion about what should happen next. He's often offered the princess's hand in marriage. He always says no. We'll come back to the reasons for that later. But then we have the idea of baptism. So he says, if everyone converts to Christianity, then that's, that is all the thank you that he needs, and he cuts the dragon's head off usually, or kills it in some unspecified way. Sometimes he is said to have killed the dragon before the business of the thank offering and the please take half of my land and my daughter's hand in marriage and all that kind of discussion. So that is the story that we have encapsulated in this image. However, that is not the only idea that our 15th century forebears would have brought to mind when they were thinking about St. George. And we'll talk a bit more about this presently. Now I'm going to see if I can get this to move. Ah, yes, I can now get it to move on. I've got here for you a Pilgrim Badge. So this is much lower status. I know I said that Book of Hours isn't great artistic work, but nevertheless, you needed a fair amount of money in order to commission and have a Book of Hours made. A Pilgrim Badge essentially is quite cheap because you can even get ones which are fake. So there was a thriving trade in Pilgrim Badges. Sitting outside, people would sit outside of the sanctuary, the area, in this case, it would almost certainly be Windsor Castle. They'd sit outside the gates at Windsor with a genuine badge and a cuttlefish bone and knock the badge into the cuttlefish bone to make a mould. And then a cuttlefish bone apparently would produce about 4 or 5 before it really got bad. And then, of course, you just use another cuttlefish bone and away you went. So you could get a really cheap pilgrim badge if you were so minded. Pilgrimage is incredibly important to medieval expressions of religion, but at the same time, we should be aware that people had a whole range of motivations to go on pilgrimage, and going out for fun was undoubtedly part of it. Chaucer was not wide of the mark in terms of the contemporary evidence that we have when he thinks of people having really quite a jolly time as they go off, of course, in his case, to Canterbury. The reason that I say Windsor is, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, there is a St. George's Chapel in Windsor, which is lots of 15th century interest there. But also we have an important relic of St. George. The heart of St. George was given to the Order of the Garter. who are based at St George's Chapel in Windsor. And that would certainly be a relic that was worth going to see. Up until that point, the gift by Emperor Sigismund, Holy Roman Emperor, it's unclear quite where you would go for a kind of central point in England. The focus of interest in St George is hard to pin down unless you are of the social elites. So, because certainly to go to Windsor, if you're not going there as part of or in connection with the Order of the Garter, it's not an obvious thing to do. It's not an obvious pilgrimage site, as Canterbury is, as Walsingham is, as frankly all sorts of other places are. So I think that we should be aware that the Pilgrim Badge doesn't necessarily imply a huge amount of interest in St George, and it certainly doesn't imply a recognition of him as a patron saint of England. However, what it does do is to tell us that he rides around on a horse some of the time. You'll have noticed in the first image that he's on foot. This is largely to do with reasons of space, I would say, but we will presently be seeing another image of St George on foot, again encountering the dragon under his feet. But notice here the dragon is in quite a similar position. It's underneath the horse's hooves. And also it's important to note that the dragon is being attacked in the mouth. That is almost identical. They're just the other way round. That's the only difference. The dragon is here on its feet and here it's on its back. But the way that St George is engaging with the dragon is actually extremely similar. And of course you've got the princess. No sheep this time. No tower, no parents looking out or anything like that. So it's a simpler format, but the essentials are still all there. However, if we go back to what's probably our earliest image of St George within England, this is what is called a tympanum. So it's a carved stone that's semicircular essentially, and it sits over a doorway, and it's from a church at Damerham in either Hampshire or Wiltshire, depending on where you draw the boundary. And this is identified as St George on his horse, of course, but he is this time attacking a human enemy. And this seems to be, sorry, could everyone mute themselves, please? Because I'm getting a little bit distracted by some of the noises off. Thank you very much. We have here, under the horse's hooves, certainly under its front hooves, a human enemy in a very, very similar position. We haven't got the attacking the mouth, but occasionally you do get that, and I'm going to demonstrate this here. I'm afraid we need to wander outside England briefly, but we're going to Georgia, which is a fine place, has St George as its patron saint, and they do a very good line in medieval icons of St George. So this is definitely St George here on his horse. He's as a Roman soldier on this occasion rather than as a knight. And he is attacking a human enemy, and we've got the attacking is here into the throat, but it's as near as makes no difference in terms of the mouth. So we've got an idea here of attacking a human enemy in a particular way, which is very, very close to images of the dragon attack, which comes chronologically later, those images. So our earlier images are with this human enemy, and it seems strongly to relate to the period of the Crusades. It doesn't have to be, though, and it's felt that in this Georgian image, what we've got is St George metaphorically overcoming an evil tyrant, somebody who is trying to stop him being Christian. I'm still getting a lot of noises off. I'm wondering if it's possible somebody who is got hosting rights for the meeting, are you able to mute everybody and then unmute me? That would be fantastic. Thank you. So trying to get my thread again. We've got here an image of not so much a physical, literal overcoming of a human enemy, but a metaphorical besting, we might say. And this idea of the saint who is put on trial and has to defend themselves and defend their Christian faith is something that is very common in stories of martyrs, of Christian martyrs. So there is, as I say, this kind of metaphorical idea as well as an idea of a literal overcoming of an enemy of some sort or another. We're back in England now. We're in the very early 16th century and we're in Leicester. I'm going to show you this image again later and say a bit more about it then. But I want to pick out for you some of the key elements that we've already mentioned. So we've got the dragon underneath the feet. This time it's St. George's feet. We've got the attack through the mouth. And also the idea, I think, of there's this lovely duality here, because you might notice there's a second head in the dragon's tail. So there's also possible to put a metaphorical understanding on. The idea of the two heads is something that comes up in the bestiary. So this is the medieval Book of Beasts, and it's an amazing form of snake called an amphisbaena, which has two heads, one at each end, and it will put one head into the mouth of the other and make itself into a hoop and bowl along the road. That is its evil way of moving around, but also it's associated with duplicity and telling lies. So this actually links very nicely into that image of the mouth, the throat, the idea of the evil, naughty, wicked, heathen emperor who is saying things which are not true, is denying the truth of Christianity. So there's a really, really nice link there. So even though you may not immediately think of a dragon speaking, what you can do is imagine it as this evil, nasty thing. And of course, you've got St. George as the opposite. So you've got here a duality, not only in the two heads of the dragon, but also an oppositional duality of good versus evil. Really lends itself to those sorts of ideas. Now, I'm going to show you some images which were created around the time of the English Civil War. And they are of stained glass from St. George's Church at Stanford in Lincolnshire, and the glass is all lost apart from a couple of fragments. But we've got this lovely record of it. The glass dates from about 1450. So you need to bear in mind that we're looking at a 17th century image of 15th century glass in these next bits that I'm going to show you. At the top of the image here, we've got a layout which gives you what the chancel was like. So if you can imagine, you've got in the center there the east window, and then you've got on the left hand side the three windows on the north side, and then obviously the corresponding three windows on the south side. You should hopefully be able to see that at the bottom of each of the lights, as we would call them, so the elements within each window, this is where it'd be much easier with a big screen and I can point them out to you. But what we've got here is a series of kneeling figures. Now, these are the founder knights of the Order of the Garter, apart from the very central image, which seems to be an image of George and the dragon. This is a reconstruction, though, of lost glass. You need to bear that in mind. And then the record that I'm going to show you from the 17th century, it starts with the second window. We've lost any record of the first window other than what I'm showing you here, which is essentially drawn by somebody who didn't know what they were looking at. That is the best suggestion that I can give you. At the bottom, yes, I think we can decipher that fairly well as being the founder knights of the Order of the Garter, but what on earth is going on above? There is a possibility that there is a lost story here, which is so lost that it is completely impossible to reconstruct. But I think it's more likely that this is just invention, because it doesn't relate to anything that I've found and that I can make any sense of at all. And again, the relatively late date of this chapbook image, which is in Devizes in Wiltshire, in case you're interested in looking it up, it tends to imply that the glass was long gone by the time that this drawing. It was simply somebody had a sense of there being a story along the top and the Foundanites along the bottom. That is what we're getting, I think. Now, the story has not had a lot of attention, and this is because it's the bottom level that everybody's got very interested in. And the reason is that the person who paid for the glazing of the chancel was this man here, who's shown with St George, and he is William Bruges, and he's the first Garter King of Arms. So he looks like he's got an amazing crown on, but that's because he's the Garter King of Arms, not because he's an actual monarch. And obviously he's here with St George. I hope you're noticing the dragon's position and the dragon being stabbed in the mouth and so forth. Good. I'm very glad to see all of that. So this book here is about the Garter, about the foundation of the Order of the Garter, whereas the book that I'm going to show you the images from is not to do with that. So it's a different record. I just wanted to give you a sense of why it's the Foundanites of the Order of the Garter and why the interest has been in that. It's because it's William Bruges, and a lot of people are interested in the Order of the Garter, to the extent that there's an entire book written about William Bruges and the foundation of the Order of the Garter. And there is a lot of discussion about who the Foundanites were and whether they're accurately represented in the images that we have that have survived from the 17th century. But there's one sentence about what goes on above, what's in this upper level, and it says it would no doubt repay the attentions of somebody well versed in the iconography of St George. And apparently that's me, because I seem to be the only person ever to have actually done a proper analysis of this work. So you're not going to really hear anything more about the Order of the Garter, for which I apologise if that's why you've come. But what you are going to do is to see some really, I think, fascinating images which indicate one of these lost stories of St George. So don't worry about what it says at the top. It is simply citing the image for you. So it's saying it is the second light in the second window. So we've lost everything up until this point. We've got, we have got the first light in the second window, which I'm going to show you a bit later on. But here we've got St George with a human enemy. He's engaging in battle. It's a different kind of setup to what we saw with the naughty heathen emperor. So there's nobody down on the ground. They're not being stabbed in the face or the throat or anything like that. But yes, this is a story of St George with a human enemy. What happens next is he gets captured and he is executed because of his great love for the Virgin Mary, and I think we can extrapolate from that his refusal to give up his Christian faith. But he's shown here kneeling before an image of the Virgin and Child, and the idea is not that a church is being despoiled by his execution. It is his faith that he is suffering for, and he's actually executed for that. So the next image shows him being resurrected. So he's in the coffin with the grave clothes around him, and then we have the Virgin Mary, who is holding his hand, and obviously she's being assisted here by angels. At this point, you'll probably start to notice that the colouring hasn't been completely finished, and this is a hallmark of this particular work, which is Dugdale's Book of Monuments. It's in the British Library. All we can do is to say that, well, William Dugdale and his friend William Sedgwick, the limner, went around and kind of recorded things that they thought were interesting, but they perhaps didn't entirely get around to finishing them off. But we've got enough here to know what we're looking at. So we have there the resurrection, and we then move on to, it's the dragon fight. We recognise this. So dragon under the horse's hooves. There's the princess. The lamb seems to be absent for some reason, but we have definitely got the parents looking out of the city up at the back. So this is a very, very familiar image in terms of our 15th century knowledge and audience. Moving on, the next image is the baptism of the king and the queen and the princess, which, as I said earlier on, this is part of the idea of the exchange that's being made for the dragon being dispatched. So this is a story which, if you've not heard me speak before or not read any of my work, you may well not be familiar with. What I can tell you is that it doesn't seem to be recorded in writing anywhere, but we do have visual imagery. And there are 4 different versions of it, and I'm about to show you a second one. There's one in stained glass, which is at St Neot in Cornwall, and there is also an English alabaster altarpiece at a place called Borbjerg in Denmark, which I've had the great pleasure of going to see. They are visually more complicated and difficult to understand, but what I'm going to show you now is the more straightforward version, which is English alabaster altarpiece at a place called La Selle in Normandy. I couldn't swear to it that it's still in La Selle. I think it's been moved. They were waiting for the mayor to die last time I was there, so it could be taken to a safer location. And we have here a story of St George across the top and the life of the Virgin Mary across the bottom. Yes, I did manage to write 100,000 words about this piece, and no, I'm not going to tell you even much of what can be said about this work, but we're going to concentrate here on the elements which chime with what we've just been seeing from Stanford. So we're going to start on the top left, and we have here St George being resurrected by the Virgin Mary. It may seem a rather odd place to start with the resurrection. However, the logic, according to the Riches theory, is that you can read the same kinds of ideas in the image below as in the image above. So the image in the bottom left is the birth of the Virgin Mary. So birth and resurrection have got a lot in common. That works really, really well. Similarly, we have in the next image, which is the arming of St George. It is about taking on a new role, accepting an obligation. And underneath, we have the Virgin Mary going to live in the temple and being dedicated, which is quite an important story in late medieval understandings of the Virgin Mary. So it's again this thing about a change in life and taking on a new obligation. The thing that's missing, of course, is the battle scene. And the reason for this is probably because it has to start somewhere, and the resurrection works with the birth of the Virgin in a way that a battle scene simply wouldn't. But it's also because, you may remember I said it's in Normandy. It seems that this was actually commissioned for a Norman patron. So somebody paid for this in Normandy, and they're not desperately keen on the English in the 15th century in Normandy, to the extent that there is no reference to St George wearing a red cross on a white field, other than a tiny bit, which is his shield is sideways on. You can just about see it here on the right-hand side, and there is some paint that's left. And I think what the artist did was to basically minimize any reference to St George's English, because there is a very lively cult of St George in France, certainly in Normandy, lots and lots of evidence. And as far as they're concerned, he's got nothing to do with England whatsoever. He's their local guy. And just as in Germany, St George is German, in Portugal, he's Portuguese, in Russia, he's Russian. So there's no reason why somebody in Nottingham, probably making this work, would automatically think, oh, he has to be made English because of these English people who have him as their patron. Just doesn't work like that at that time. So I think the idea here is that they kind of get round the idea of the battle. Who are these terrible people who cut his head off? And one of the reasons may be that they are possibly Gauls, and it's the story that's given in the version at St. Neot in the stained glass there, which does have little inscriptions, and it does describe the enemy soldiers as the Gallicani. And M.R. James, the great ghost story writer and fantastic medievalist, he's the person who identified Gallicani as Gauls, and I'm certainly not going to argue with him. But again, you can imagine that for a Norman audience, the idea of Gauls being the baddies really isn't going to be terribly popular. So we have the arming scene here. Now, you'll have noticed we didn't get one of those at Stanford. It may be that the record isn't complete, and there was originally an arming scene, or for some other reason that we just don't know about, they were picking and choosing what they were putting into that sequence. But here, between the two things, we do seem to get the full story, because following on from the arming, and that is the Virgin Mary, by the way, who's arming him as her knight, off he goes, and he does the business with the dragon. And then we, of course, get the we get the baptism, just as we would expect. So it's quite consistent in terms of what we've already seen from Stanford, but there are some other elements as well. Now, the dragon here is standing up, and one of the reasons is because she is then immediately above the Virgin Mary, and you've got this dualism. I'm just going to take you back to the full thing. So the image underneath the dragon slaying is of the Annunciation. So that's the Virgin Mary over on the right-hand side. So it's not immediately one above the other, but it's pretty close. And you've got there the best of women, the epitome of womanhood at the bottom, and you've got the evil, naughty womanhood at the top. And by the way, if you're wondering why the Virgin Mary is across the bottom, the answer is that it's higher status, because it's closer to the altar. The fact that this is an altarpiece is really, really important in our understanding of how it works visually. So it isn't that higher is better here, it's lower is better, because it is an altarpiece. So we've got the naughty dragon up above, and you'll notice that I'm saying she is female. And the reason is that when I first saw this altarpiece, I was in front of it for about 3 hours and eventually noticed that, yes, she does have genitals. And more to the point, there is a horse's hoof that's pointing directly at it. Now, when I first saw it, I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder if this is original. And it turned out that this panel, in fact, was stolen, and somebody who doesn't know much about alabaster put it in the River Seine and it melted. So this particular panel is a replacement, a modern replacement. However, thankfully, we've got photographs from 1911 before the theft, and the dragon is spot on. It's exactly the same as it is in the original photographs. So the knight, they've got some of the armor details a bit wrong in this 1960s version, but in terms of it being the way that this was created in about 1480, it is actually really very, very well done. And if we go back to our friend at Leicester, who's a little bit later, probably about 25 years later, about 1505, yes, this is a female dragon as well. So there are the genitals. I'm not going to labour the point, as it were, here with you, because we've got more things to say. But certainly I'm very happy to pick this up in the discussion. And I would just point out that the one of the things that you can deduce from the dragon being attacked in the mouth is, of course, duplicity and lying and so forth. But it's also because the mouth is a double of the vagina. This is quite a strong understanding in medieval worldview, as it were. So I can give you one example that in manuals for midwives, a woman who is struggling in labour, one of the things that you're encouraged to do is to get her to open her mouth. It's thought there's some kind of sympathetic bond here. So let's go back, though, to the idea of St. George and the Virgin Mary. We have, I hope, established a strong connection for you that we have. It's not, St. George isn't simply a knight wandering about because it's a good thing to do. He is specifically understood as the champion of the Virgin Mary. And they are They come up together time and again at Windsor. This is some images I haven't had time to show you tonight, but there's a beautiful carved from about 1485, almost exactly the same date as the alabaster, in fact, sequence of the life of the Virgin Mary, sequence of St. George, and one image that ties them together where St. George is kneeling in front of the Virgin Mary. So there is a really, really strong idea there. And in particular, it seems to be very prevalent in England. And the reason is because England is understood by English people, probably not anybody else, but it's understood to be the special place that belongs to the Virgin. It's known sometimes as the Virgin's dowry. So if you have a look here at this anonymous lyric, St. George, Our Lady's Knight. So Our Lady is, of course, the Virgin Mary. And then we go down a few lines. Thou art our patroness, knight ypreve. So our patroness is the Virgin Mary. And we have this really, really strong idea that links the Virgin Mary and England. And I think that this is one of the reasons why St. George becomes understood to be the patron saint of England, because he is the Virgin's champion. So it's not that people simply think St. George is marvellous. It is actually that he's got this link to the Virgin Mary, and the Virgin Mary has a very special relationship with England. But as I said earlier on, don't run away with the idea that anybody else thinks this. That I really don't think that England as the Virgin's dowry is understood outside England at all. If anybody can correct me on that, that would be delightful. So we've got a number of these written accounts. I've also got, for instance, a lovely charm against the nightmare, where it's essentially to protect your horse from an evil hag coming and riding it through the night. And of course, St. George is the saint that you invoke to protect your horse because of his link to horses, because of the understanding of him as a knight. But he is explicitly described as Our Lady Knight, the Knight of the Virgin Mary there. So whilst we don't have the story that I've recounted to you about him being captured by the Gallicani and having his head cut off and then being resurrected and going off as her champion, we don't have that written down anywhere, but we certainly do have written evidence of this understanding of him as Our Lady's Knight. So far so good. I'm really confident about this, but I'm not confident about what I'm showing you now. This is the first image in the second window at Stanford, remembering that we've lost any record of the first window other than that odd thing from Devises that I don't really believe. So this is the bit that comes immediately before St. George getting into the battle with the Gallicani. And no, I don't understand what's going on here. It could be that William Sedgwick, the limner, he didn't understand it either, and so he's got a few things a bit wrong. Or it may be that we simply have completely lost what this story was. I can reasonably confidently say, though, that there is a link between St. George and water, and that does turn up in other contexts. So if I mention St. George's Channel to you, that is an area off Bristol, basically. If you listen to the shipping forecast, it will come up. We also have the song from Cornwall for May Day, which is St. George is out in his longboat. So there's a few kind of scattered references like this, and I think that they are giving us a sense of something that's just out of reach. That these stories, these ideas, and certainly it comes up in other countries. So I've got, for instance, I was delighted to be told on one occasion that there is a story in Brazil of St. George visiting Brazil. He came from the sea and he brought his wife Joan of Arc. Absolutely fantastic image, but for our purposes, it's him on the water, which is useful. So it's completely removed from the idea of him as a knights. There's no reference to a dragon, anything like that. It's St George and water. And by the same token, we have something I'm not showing you tonight, which is what else goes on at Stanford and what else goes on in other images, image cycles of St George, and lots of the written lives, which is St George as a martyr. Images of torture are manifold in the medieval consciousness anyway. They do like a good torture, gruesome story, but St George kind of just has it to the nth degree. I undertook a fairly scientific counting process of looking at how many different tortures and torments were associated with him. So the rack and the wheel and being boiled in oil and cut in half, and on it goes and on it goes. And there were A, a lot, and B, you didn't need to have any of them specifically. So the fact that we think of the wheel in association with St Catherine, I think we're all familiar with that, at least from the firework. But with St George, there isn't a specific torture that he has to have. Similarly, he doesn't always have to have a dragon. It's entirely possible to have visual sequences of St George where there's no reference to the dragon. And in his first version of his life in England, which is by Aelfrich around the time of the Norman conquest, he's simply a holy man who is martyred for his belief in Christianity. There's nothing at all about a dragon. That comes in much later. So St George and water. If we look outside of England, though, we can find some evidence elsewhere. And you may like to try this on St George's Day. We will quite possibly have some snow. And if you clean your face with snow on St George's Day, you will get a fair, clean and unfreckled complexion and avoid skin diseases. So this is evidence from the early 20th century, collected in oral history accounts. As you can see here from South Estonia, some really brilliant work was done there around St George, and a whole set of belief systems that is actually part of another talk to do with St George and cows and horses and all sorts of things. But I picked this element out for you to do with St George and water. Birch sap, okay, maybe that's not particularly water, but a sanitary bathe, 80 reports of that. So this idea that you will improve your skin, but also protect your skin from disease by taking a sanitary bathe on St George's Day. I think that's a really lovely idea. And I would say that whilst I can't evidence this for you from medieval England, what I can give you, though, is St George's association with skin disease. So he is invoked against all kinds of different things, but one of those is around scaly skin. He's meant to be protective or healing for that, and the logic is because of the dragon scales. So this is my non-medieval image, and I took it down the road at Fairfield, back when we were allowed to do wassailing and so forth. So this is an image of the Green Man. I hope we would all agree with that. It is a topic that is much contested, but I am reasonably confident in saying that there is a lot of evidence that St George is strongly identified with the Green Man. It's difficult to point to that in England, but you can certainly do it when you look elsewhere. So I have here a little list of oh, she says confidently, that seems to have disappeared. Oh, there we go. Right. Yes, his name, George, means a ploughman, a cultivator of land. He comes from farming stock. He is associated with the act of farming. His name is nothing to do with dragon slaying or being a knight or anything like that. I'll get the next one up. There we go. This is a Russian idea. St George will bring the spring. The fact that St George's Day is the 23rd of April is, of course, strongly related to that. And there is no spring without St George. This is another one of these proverbs that is particularly associated with Central and Northern Europe. With his key, St George makes the grass grow. I'm not entirely sure why he has the key. I'm still working on that one. We would normally associate keys with St Peter, of course, the keys to heaven. But the idea of St George making the grass grow is this very, very strong idea about springtime with him. There's his keys again. In his pocket are the keys to heaven. So there's something going on. But again, I can't tell you that English medieval people would necessarily think this. But he might turn up with his fish basket. So here we are in, I think, back in Estonia again, and this idea that it's when the fish are migrating. It's the sense of St George's Day as the turning of the year. It's a very, very powerful idea that turns up in a number of cultures in Serbia, for instance. It's also very strong in the Roma culture. So they have a particular celebration of St George's Day, which is called Erdlezi, and it's Old St George's Day, 6th of May. They don't respect the change of the calendar, but it's very, very much about the turning of the year. And I've got a couple more for you. Here we go. When St George comes, the plough will go to the fields. St George will take the plough to the fields. George will bind, Michael will unbind. This is Michael as in Michaelmas. So it's the other end of the farming year. And the binding and unbinding here is to do with entering into a contract of labour. So the idea of the hiring fair, this kind of thing. So on St George's Day, you would be bound into your farm work for the coming months. And this is a lovely one. St George's Day will bring an after-meal nap, and a sheaf of rye will take it away. So it's again the beginning and end of the cycle of the season. So I wish that I could give you the evidence from medieval England, but I think that it is simply lost from our communal memories in a way that it has persisted in other parts of the world. And I can say world because St George is recognised, versions of St George are recognised in 4 of the 5 major world religions and in some of the smaller religions as well. So I'm happy to talk a bit more about that, but I'm going to finish now with a very local image. George and the Dragon pub, of course, down on St George's Quay. Why is it called St George's Quay? That's a really interesting question in itself. But I hope that I've given you some sense that when you see this very, very familiar image of George and the Dragon, actually there is potential for this whole hinterlands beneath it and around it. And it's very exciting for me, and I think it's very illuminating for many other people to realise that when you see something such as a mummers play, where St George is a soldier, where he is fighting a human enemy, that there is some kind of persistence there with this much wider idea of St George and his significance in medieval society. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Yes,
And,
a very nice.
I can stop my screen share.
So, thank you for that.
I'm just going to put the lights on. I realise it's gone very dark while I've been talking.
It has. Any questions?
There we go.
You'll have to indicate that, otherwise I'll never find you. Someone got a question? If you go into reactions at the bottom of your screen, there's an opportunity to put your hand up like Amy's just done. So Amy, over to you.
Hi Sam, thanks for a fascinating talk. So many things to talk about. But the one I want to talk about was the kind of cult of St George through the Order of the Garter and St George's Chapel, obviously very much in the news at the moment, and the kind of original association of St George with the Virgin Mary. I'm assuming that then got disconnected at some point. Was that kind of through the Reformation, or did that happen earlier? assuming it happened at all?
Yeah, it is a really interesting question, because when the Order of the Garter was founded, which is in about 1351, originally there's a whole sequence of different patrons, but St George becomes the preeminent one. He is there from the beginning, but it isn't, you know, it's not the Order of the Garter by the way we mean St George. Later on, it is there. It's almost an interchangeable idea. I think that happens before the Reformation, but in terms of a severing of, as you say, the connection between George and the Virgin Mary, the Reformation certainly won't have helped, because we've certainly got a scenario of, well, frankly, St George should never have survived. The cult of St George should not have survived in Protestant countries. He's not an apostle. There's precious little evidence that he ever lived or, you know, did any of the things that he's associated with. The first attempt to suppress him was in the 5th century. It didn't work. But, you know, he's always been a very problematic figure in some ways, but he's also incredibly useful. He was politically extremely useful. And I think that in the post-Reformation period, the idea of St George as a patron of the monarchy and as a patron of the aristocracy was simply too useful to let go of. And yes, we can quietly forget about the Virgin Mary because she is far less important in post-Reformation English religion, if I can put it in that way, than she was previously. And to give you a slight analogy there, many years ago, when I did my master's degree, I worked on the cult of St Anne, and that is the mother of the Virgin Mary, and she was hugely popular in the late medieval period, but she became an embarrassment for both sides after the Reformation, to the extent that my mother basically had a row with somebody that she worked with who wouldn't accept that the mother of the Virgin Mary was called Anne. And that was someone who'd been brought up as a Catholic. So that's how far it had disappeared. So I think that your idea of there being a rupture is absolutely right. And it's something that we can see it happening in other saints' cults.
Okay, thanks, Sam.
Roger?
Is his spear a phallic symbol?
Can you move nearer your...
Sorry.
No.
Is St George's spear a phallic symbol?
Yes. Absolutely.
I thought it was.
Absolutely, yeah. I did a talk a few weeks ago for the LGBT plus staff network at the university, which Amy was instrumental in getting me set up for that. And I'm sure, Amy, you'll remember some of the rather graphic images that I showed. So yeah, the idea of a pointer that's pointing towards the dragon's genitals is something that comes up. I'm not going to say consistently, because there are lots and lots of medieval images of the dragon where gender just isn't a thing. It's not apparent, and it doesn't seem to be an issue for the artist or for the patron. But where it does turn up, it's quite often there's a pointer. So in our image that we saw from Lascelles, the alabaster altarpiece, you've got the horse's hoof acting as the pointer, but sometimes it will be a lance or spear lying on the ground, and it's giving you that visual cue, which is, if you know to look for it, it can be, should we say, striking.
Elizabeth.
We know that St George is popular in very many countries. Where did he start off, Sam? Which country did he first appear in?
Oh, it all depends who you ask. So I had the great pleasure of visiting Georgia, Tbilisi, a few years ago, and I was there for Winter St George's Day. They like St George so much that they celebrate his day twice a year, and it's absolutely definitive that St George is Georgian, that he undergoes everything, you know, as part of their localized understanding. And they claim to have the longest unbroken tradition of Christianity in the world. Now, the other place that claims to have the longest unbroken tradition of Christianity is Ethiopia. And so you're talking about Georgian Orthodox and you're talking about Coptic. And St. George is extremely popular in Ethiopia, and he is Ethiopian. My view is probably he's ultimately a saint of the Eastern Mediterranean. There are quite a few stories that locate him there, and we don't have what we would call an text, an original text of the life of St. George, but the earliest ones do seem to relate to that area. So he's Lebanese, he's Palestinian, something like this. There's a massive cult of St. George in Lebanon, and it's somewhere that, you know, one day I hope that I will be able to go there when it's safe. But the phrase that they have there is, God is great, but he's not like St. George. And when I found that, I was sitting in a university library in London, and I nearly fell off my chair. I thought I couldn't put it any better. That he is, in fact, you get this sometimes in some English tradition as well. There is a concern that he gets tired. He gets worn out by all of the demands that are made upon him. Everybody goes to St. George for everything. And similarly in Ethiopia, I'm very proud of some Ethiopian beer, St. George beer, and the legend in Amharic, in the local language, it says the everyday choice. And it's not to say it isn't worth anything, oh, it's just every day, you know, and here's the special stuff over here. It is impossible to manage without St. George. You need him every day. And therefore our beer, which is created by the St. George's Brewery, and it's special beer for St. George, this is all part of, you know, you should definitely have it every day because it's very good for you. It's that kind of idea that comes through very, very strongly. So long-winded answer, Elizabeth. No, but basically, I think Eastern Mediterranean, but gets localized everywhere you go. We've got 6 different sites in England and Wales that claim to be where St. George killed the dragon. And that's just typical. You can go really anywhere that there's a significant cult of St. George, and he has been localized. He jumped off that mountain over there, and that chapel is built where he landed in Crete. I've come across that, for instance.
No wonder we've run out of dragons. Howard?
Yeah, thank you. I was just unmuting. I mean, my question may have been partly answered through the other comments about the Middle East and with the association with St. George in Jerusalem. Do you have anything to say about that?
St. George in Jerusalem. Yes. In fact, you, Elizabeth, mentioned to me just the other day about the
yeah, it was church, the Anglican Church in Jerusalem. St.
Absolutely, George. Yes, yeah, yes. St. George is a very, very interesting character in that he has the potential to bring together people from Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, which of course is ideal in Jerusalem. Now, I've always struggled a bit with the equivalent of St. George in Judaism. It's very difficult to get people to talk much about it. Elijah, the prophet, seems to be the one that it relates to. But in Islam, it's specifically Sufism, where St. George is strongly recognized, and he is under the name of Al-Qudr, which means the green one. And there is an idea, of course, of spring and fertility and so forth there. But also, there's been, I took part in a TV documentary some years ago on the patron saints of Britain and Ireland. And annoyingly, I wasn't invited to go out to Palestine because I would really like to have done that. But Robert Beckford, the theologian, he got to go and do it. And he was talking to people, and they were looking at images that we would read from a Christian culture as St. George. And he was saying, who's that? And the answer came back, that's Al-Qudr. So even though there doesn't seem to be an understanding of Al-Qudr fighting a dragon, an image of a soldier fighting a dragon is understood as Al-Quda, just as he's understood as St. George. I can't get there with him being identified as Elijah as well, unfortunately. But it's something I will work on. But he does have this. Unfortunately, I think for some people in England, he's got St. George has a slightly unfortunate reputation, shall we say, because he's identified with empire, with colonialism and so forth. But the reality is it's a tiny, tiny bit of his cult. And Belgium, for instance, my goodness, Belgium did colonialism and how. But their interest in St. George doesn't have anything at all to do with colonialism. So I've been in Belgium for the huge festival, which goes on for 7 days. Unfortunately, I couldn't stay that long, but it's all based around reenacting St. George and the Dragon, and it's absolutely stunning. There's about 10,000 people turned out in the city square in Mons, depending on which pronunciation you like, and they reenact the battle between George and the Dragon on Trinity Sunday every year, and it's recognised by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site in the sense of intangible history, and it's absolutely stunning. And I managed to write an entire book about St. George without having ever heard of it. So there is so much more. He's in my second. That's in my second book, though. I did manage to get it into that one, but there is just so much, and it's far more than any one person could cover in one lifetime. So I would say, I think there's a lot of potential to do more work around St. George in the Eastern Mediterranean, and obviously Jerusalem would be a strong candidate, but that probably isn't going to be down to me to do it.
Right. Now my screen is clear of hands. I can take one more. Howard.
Right, it's just a question about mummers and whether this tradition goes back to the Middle Ages or whether it's a modern reimagining of that.
It's so funny that you say that. I was in the castle today filming for the next Regional Heritage Centre event, which is going to be up in May, and it's about ballads. And so I was with a couple of folk singers who are both academics as well as being performers. And over lunch, they got into really quite an interesting discussion. And one of them was saying, and of course, it's all nonsense about mumming having any roots in, in the medieval period. It's all upset. And the other one agrees. And I thought, I'm just going to stay quiet. I'm not going to go there. But I feel that the image of the Turkish knight or the Knight of Paradise or whatever it is, they have different names, but the image of St. George overcoming that, and then the Doctor coming in and performing the resurrection, I'm thinking, I can see exactly where that's coming from. That it may be that we've got a break, and it could be that there's a coincidence, and I'm not going to be definitive about it, but it's incredibly tempting. There's an image cycle of St. George that I can think of where he gets resurrected 3 times. There's also a story to do with healing, everywhere you look with St. George, almost, particularly Palestine. I've got lots of great examples from there, from Palestinian Christian sources, and also going across the traditions. So if it is a complete break and the Victorians just sat down and invented this staff, then they've got me fooled, I think is the best that I can say. But I wouldn't necessarily tell an academic folk singer that.
Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you for those questions. And thank you, Sam. That was fascinating, really. I knew that St. George was pretty widespread across the East myself, but the detail, and also things like windows that are put back together incorrectly. I think there's been another instance discovered recently with the stained glass window that was damaged and put back together in a completely wrong order. So quite fascinating. So can we show our appreciation in the normal manner? You'll have to unmute yourself for anybody to hear you, but there's now right at the very beginning, before Sam started to speak, Howard put a question forward, and it was to do with a mill race. Howard, do you want to repeat that question?
Yes, well, I was in a Lancaster Arts Partnership meeting at lunchtime, a Zoom meeting, and it came up that there is an area adjacent to the Canal Quarter, Culture Quarter, that's being described as the Mill Race Quarter, and they're hoping to get funding from Heritage England, from this governmental money that's coming out for deprived, not deprived areas, but sort of architecturally depressed areas as such. And it's taking in St. John's Church and all that area from the Grand Theatre either side of Leonardgate and round there.
Right.
That was the map I saw this morning. I mentioned it, at least I put it in the chat this morning. I didn't get an answer. So I thought, well, the best thing, now I'm at the Civic Society meeting, I'll ask the Civic Society if they know anything about it. But whoever it is, this initiative, Heritage Initiative, is putting in for something like £88,000 to assist in developing the area, including the foyer at the Grand Theatre.
Right. The area was put forward by the City Council for a bid for some development in that area, but my understanding was that they'd failed in their bid. Right. I mean, the mill race from the where it emptied into the Loon to where Dalton's mill was, by the Chapel Street there, that basically became a sewer. But I'm not sure what the route was from there upriver. Roger would probably know better than I would.
Yes, it goes under Sowerby's garage and becomes next to Sowerby's garage is what they call it, Dana car valet now. It is a rope walk which should be preserved, but yes, unfortunately it's been spoiled. It had a cobbled floor. The Sowerby's put concrete down, but it's still a long, narrow building, which was one of 5 rope walks and was in use up until the Second World War, where they made the handles, the rope handles for ammunition boxes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think they're calling it the Mill Race Quarter just because that area was known for the mill race.
You told a bit softer.
Oh, I can't. And so that's the reason it's being given that title, rather than anything to do with the actual mill race now underground. But it's just the buildings within that area.
Yes.
Well, one of the important buildings within that area is the Lyle Tool Shop, which was the shop that the apprentices and workers at Waring and Gillows bought their tools. And there's a great move, because the mill race goes underneath it, to demolish it and rebuild some nasty little student prison instead.
Yes.
But they really must keep the frontage. If what they do to the back is up to them, but they need to keep the frontage, which is all we've got left of Gillows really now, because it's all. Yes.
Well, the Gillows, the Gillows building and the Sugar House are all within this area. Yeah. Right. I'll see if I can find out a little bit more.
Yes. Well, yeah, would be interested to hear. Carolyn, you're muted, Carolyn.
Yeah.
You've gone.
Can you
you've
hear me okay?
Sorry?
Can you hear me okay?
You can now. You suddenly froze.
All right. Yes, my internet's not too good at the moment. No, it was just to sort of explain that what Howard's talking about is that that area has received funding. It's being led by the planning section of the council, but that area has received funding, Heritage Action Zone funding, and as part of that funding, so that funding is covering various sort of capital works, including the work that Howard was talking about with regard to the assisting with the Grand Theatre. But there's also the opportunity to apply for money for a 3-year cultural project, which is what Howard is alluding to, that must have been mentioned at the Arts Partnership meeting. So if they put the application, I think they've submitted the application for the funding, and certainly if it's successful, I would urge the Civic Society to get involved.
Well, I'm sure we'd welcome the opportunity.
Yeah, but no, it looks like it's going to be a really nice project that's going to help bring out the heritage of that area, which, as you say, has been rather neglected in recent years.
Yes, that's certainly one way of describing it.
Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Carolyn. That's very interesting, because I must have been missed part of it or something, but that explains it more clearly. And I think they were trying to encourage as many people as possible, which is why I put in the chat, what about the Civic Society? And I got no response, you see, so that's why I thought I'd ask tonight. So thanks, that's cleared it up a lot.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, no problem. I'm sure they'll let you know if they get the money. So,
Right. Thanks. For that. Right. So thank you again, Sam, for your talk. Thank you all for coming along this evening, including our special guests from the Archaeological and History group. The Civic Society, of course, is always looking for new members. If anyone is interested, it's very cheap, but we put on an excellent selection of speakers, including Sam tonight. So if anyone is interested in joining us, please contact David. A quick point, I will bring it up now. We have our AGM coming up in June. This is obviously addressed to the Civic Society, and 2 of our executive members regretfully have given their resignations. So we will be looking for at least 2 new executive committee members. So if you'd be anyone's interested in putting themselves forward, will they come back to me or David or James, and we can then have a chat and discuss what's involved. So that concludes our speaker meeting. Have a safe journey home, and it's not raining, so you won't get wet. Good night.